Imagine this. You wake up tomorrow morning and find the world subtly changed. The elections still happen. Politicians still argue on television. Newspapers still run headlines about freedom and democracy. But behind every decision, every law, every choice offered to you, there is an invisible hand guiding the outcome. Would you even notice? This isn't the plot of a dystopian movie. It's closer to the question Aristotle himself wrestled with over 2,000 years ago. He believed that the greatest threat to any society was not an invading army, not even a tyrant, but something far more subtle: oligarchy, the rule of the few wealthy over the many. Tyrants, he said, are obvious. They put their faces on coins, demand obedience, and often meet brutal ends. But oligarchs, they don't need crowns or thrones. They wear suits, run corporations, sponsor charities, and shake hands with presidents. They are invisible, precisely because they appear respectable. Pause and think. When was the last time you saw someone immensely wealthy face real consequences for their actions? Did the financial crisis of 2008 end with bankers in jail? Did the opioid epidemic see billionaires behind bars? Or did those responsible pay fines that barely scratched their fortunes while millions suffered? This is exactly what Aristotle feared. Not wealth itself, but inequality without virtue. Power held by those who do not bear the costs of their decisions. A society where responsibility and consequence are severed. And here's the chilling part. We may already be living inside Aristotle's nightmare. But before we dive into today's world, let's retrace his thought process. Aristotle didn't see government as static. He saw it as a living organism, always shifting, always vulnerable to decay. For him, history wasn't a straight line toward progress. It was a cycle of rise and rot. He mapped it out like this. Monarchy can decay into tyranny when kings stop serving the people. Aristocracy can decay into oligarchy when merit gives way to greed. Constitutional government can decay into mob rule when emotion replaces reason. Notice the pattern. Every form of government has a deviant twin, born when rulers rule for themselves instead of the common good. So why single out oligarchy as the most dangerous? Because, unlike tyranny, it doesn't look like oppression. It looks like business as usual. This is where Aristotle was ahead of his time. He anticipated the psychology of power, that human beings will protect the very systems that exploit them. If those systems are dressed up with symbols of freedom, fast forward to our world. We post online, we vote every few years, we protest in the streets. And yet, policy after policy still bends toward the interests of the wealthy few. Have you ever wondered why? To answer that, we need to explore not just Aristotle's politics, but also modern psychology and economics. Because the story of oligarchy isn't only about money. It's about how human minds can be persuaded, divided, and lulled into defending the very forces that keep them powerless. Nietzsche once wrote, "The most common lie is that which one lies to oneself." Could it be that our biggest obstacle isn't the oligarchs themselves, but our refusal to admit how much power they already hold? As we move forward, I want you to keep asking yourself, what does freedom really mean? And would you recognize its absence if the rituals of democracy kept going, but the substance was hollowed out? Let's bring Aristotle's fear into today's headlines. Think about the case of Boeing and the 737 MAX. A company rushed planes into production, cut safety corners, and 2 planes crashed, killing 346 people. The FAA, the very agency meant to regulate Boeing, had outsourced key certification back to Boeing's own engineers. That's not oversight. That's collusion. Executives didn't go to jail. The company paid fines, rebranded, and kept going. Lives were lost, but wealth remained intact. Aristotle would have looked at this and said, this is oligarchy. Or take Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family. They knew opioids were addictive. They hid the data, aggressively marketed OxyContin, and fueled an epidemic that killed over 400,000 Americans. When they were caught, they paid fines, a fraction of their billions, but faced no prison time. Meanwhile, Addicts were criminalized. Again, this is oligarchy. Oligarchy, in Aristotle's terms, isn't just the rich ruling. It's when wealth shields its holders from consequence, while ordinary people absorb the cost. But how do oligarchs maintain power without open violence? That's where psychology comes in. Psychologists John Jost and Mauzarin Banaji developed system justification theory. They found that people have a deep psychological need to believe the system they live in is fair, even when it obviously isn't. In fact, the poor, the very people most harmed by inequality, often defend it the most. Why? Because admitting the system is rigged means admitting you are trapped. And that's unbearable. So, what do we do instead? We rationalize. We tell ourselves stories. Maybe the rich just worked harder. Maybe they're smarter. Maybe I'll be rich too someday. We cling to the fantasy of the American dream, even as the economic ladder is pulled away. Oligarchs understand this perfectly. They don't just control wealth. They control imagination. Socrates once said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." But here's the twist. Oligarchy thrives on unexamined lives. As long as we don't question the system, as long as we keep hoping for crumbs today and cake tomorrow, we remain docile. And when crumbs aren't enough, oligarchs turn to their second strategy: division. Aristotle noted that tyrants survive by sowing discord. Oligarchs have perfected the art. Instead of outright repression, they keep people busy fighting each other. Think of Amazon spending millions on anti-union consultants to prevent workers in Alabama from organizing. What did the media focus on? Whether those workers were being manipulated by outsiders, not the fact that Jeff Bezos made $13 billion in one day during the pandemic, while his workers struggled to afford health care. Divide workers by race, religion, immigration status, and they'll never unite around wages. Pit the middle class against the poor, and they'll side with oligarchs out of fear. Keep the news cycle filled with cultural fights, and no one notices economic inequality reaching record highs. This isn't conspiracy. It's strategy as old as Rome. Divide et impera. Divide and rule. And what happens when division succeeds? The middle class, the backbone of democracy, starts to collapse. Aristotle believed the middle class was essential. They're not desperate enough to be bought, not rich enough to be corrupted, and large enough to balance extremes. He called them democracies, immune system. But look at the data. Since 1979, productivity in the US has increased 70%. But wages for typical workers, only 12%. The top 1% now controls 32% of all wealth, while the bottom 50% owns just 2%. College costs have skyrocketed over 1,200% since 1980. Healthcare bankrupts hundreds of thousands each year. This isn't an accident. It's engineered extraction. And when the middle class collapses, people don't revolt. They shut down. Martin Seligman's famous experiments with dogs showed how learned helplessness works. Dogs exposed to unavoidable shocks eventually stopped trying to escape, even when escape became possible. Sound familiar? Millions complain about jobs, debt, or healthcare, but few believe real change is possible. We've been trained to lie down and accept it. This is modern oligarchy's genius. It doesn't need to censor speech. It just buys the platforms. It doesn't need to rig elections. It funds every viable candidate. It doesn't need to silence truth. It floods the zone with noise. The result: a prison so elegant we defend it ourselves. But here's the question Aristotle would push us to ask. Is this decay inevitable, or can virtue, real moral courage, revive democracy before it's too late? Aristotle believed civilizations don't collapse because of enemies outside. They collapse when virtue erodes from within, when wealth becomes the only measure of worth, when leaders pursue private gain over public service, when citizens stop caring for the common good. What do we reward today? Wealth, no matter how it's gained. Fame, no matter what it's built on. Power, no matter how it's used. We've replaced citizenship with consumerism, community with competition, service with extraction. This is exactly what Aristotle feared, and what Nietzsche echoed when he warned of nihilism. A society where values are hollow, where the pursuit of money and status replaces deeper meaning. But here's the twist. If decay is cyclical, then renewal is possible. Aristotle himself said the best political community is one that nurtures a strong middle class. In modern terms, that means rediscovering balance. Kant would remind us, treat people as ends, not means. Imagine if laws were written with this principle. What would change about healthcare, education, or labor protections? Socrates would remind us, keep questioning, don't settle for easy answers. Democracy dies when citizens stop asking hard questions. And Nietzsche would challenge us, don't cling to illusions, confront reality, even when it's uncomfortable. Only then can we create new values to replace the old. So what does this mean for us? Practically, here are a few takeaways. Examine the system. Don't take inequality as just how the world works. Ask, who benefits, who pays, and who is shielded from consequence. Resist division. Notice when arguments are framed to pit you against neighbors, rather than holding elites accountable. Defend the middle ground. Support policies that prevent extremes of wealth and poverty. Stability comes from balance. Reclaim virtue. Redefine success, not as accumulation, but as contribution. Ask yourself, am I living as a citizen or just a consumer? Stay awake. The greatest danger isn't tyranny, but sleepwalking into oligarchy while believing we're free. Warning isn't a prophecy of doom. It's a mirror asking us, will we continue protecting those who exploit us, or will we remember that democracy is more than ritual? It is responsibility. The cycle of decay can be broken, but only if we have the courage to see the truth, speak it aloud, and act before the silence becomes permanent. So I'll leave you with this question. What kind of ancestor do you want to be remembered as? The one who protected the illusion of freedom, or the one who dared to reclaim it?